Okay, I admit it. The original version of this video that I recorded, the sound wasn't 100% terrific. Fine, I'll re-record it. Okay, in first blog entry about Tabmon, I promised you guys two things. One, a walkthrough of the sample Tabmon workbook that one can download from GitHub. I am delivering that right now. So let's take a look. I already have that guy open, and we're going to go through each one of these dashboards step by step. The first one, %CPU by Tableau Server service, allows me to look at all of the processes, the services on Tableau Server, and sort of see what sort of CPU they're taking. And as you can pretty much see here, brown, my VizQL server processes are doing quite a bit of CPU use. Actually, what you're looking at here is just about 2 hours of Tabmon recording, taking 1 minute samplings. I did this while I was running a fairly basic TabJolt load test, just so we could sort of see something. So if we focus on the VizQL processes, you can see one test running, right? And then I stopped, and then another test, and then I stopped, another test, another test. We can also see, if we take a look at maybe the backgrounder, the fact that I most likely had two sync jobs that executed during this 2 hour period. In fact, the fact that they start right at essentially the top of the hour, that pretty much gives it away that I had some sort of an hourly schedule running and these things kicked off. So what you're going to do here is you're going to select points of interest, and you can see that then events occur like logins and logouts and people accessing views. And then you can just kind of select whatever is of interest to you and take a look at that. Now, one thing not to get confused about on this specific report is what you select. When I select a data point here, I'm selecting actually a timestamp, not a combination of a timestamp and a service. So when I selected these 5 or 6 points, I'm selecting anything that happened across any of these services, VizQLs, backgrounders, Viz portals, etc. In fact, I'll show that to you. I'm going to select maybe 441 for Viz portal, right? And I'll select that. Now, look, I have access views and logins, logouts, things that may or may not have anything to do with Viz portal. In fact, if I select that exact same time, maybe here, but I do it up here, I see the exact same stuff showing up. So don't be fooled by that. If you don't like this behavior, you're the boss, right? All you have to do is go in and play with the actions and make it do what you want it to do. All right, so that is %CPU by Tableau Server service. Let's take a look at CPU now, overall %CPU. At the top, we are just looking at CPU. And again, you can see the same pattern that we saw before when I was running my load tests. I ran a test for this period, gave it a break as I set up, ran another, gave it a break, and then did either another, or this might even be one of my backgrounders running. Not really sure. At the bottom, I see % of CPU utilization per process, per service. I have 2 VizQLs running. I have my Viz portal, I have my backgrounder, my gateway, and you'll actually notice here, if you start adding these numbers up, this is definitely more than 100% when I add these numbers up. No big deal. This is sort of an interesting thing. When you use Windows perfmon counters and you monitor % CPU utilization across the whole machine, it's a counter called total, by the way, it's always going to max out at 100%, and that's why we see 100 here. When you start monitoring % CPU usage on a per process basis, as we're doing here, we actually add that stuff up or summarize it, or I should say Windows does, a little bit differently. We count that stuff by cores. So if I did my testing on a 4-core machine, which by the way is what I did. It's a dinky old i5 consumer machine that I just installed Tableau Server on. So don't take any of these numbers as realistic because I just had some hardware available. But a 4-core machine, if I were to monitor this VizQL process and it took up the entire CPU, it would show upwards of 400% CPU utilization. That's completely normal. That's just kind of how the Windows perfmon counter works. So if you see that, it is normal. Don't freak out. You're good. You'll also see that there's some highlighting up here. Essentially, it looks like anything above 75, 80% starts becoming red. This is a hint to you that if you see lots of red up here consistently over a long period of time, it may be time for you to upgrade. You need more CPU. The rule of thumb is generally anytime you see more than 70% or more CPU consistently utilization on your server, time to start thinking about an upgrade. Okay, you'll see lots of spikes to 100% or 70% plus all the time. That's no big deal either. But if it's consistently over 70 to 80%, time to think about upgrading. All right, let's go to memory. This is kind of fun. This is committed bytes in use. So what percentage of my RAM is being used on the machine? And you can see some sort of fun patterns here. 30%, and then we go up and up and up. And then it pauses and then more. So this is probably me running one test and then pausing and then another test. And when I finished with this test, notice the big drop. Why is that? Well, it's because for all intents and purposes, I got bored and I manually killed my two VizQL server processes. They were consuming a lot of memory on my little machine. So the amount of memory being consumed overall in the machine dropped dramatically. Then I did another test. It went up and up and up. And it looks like here again, I got bored at the end and either bounced the box or recycled those processes. All right, on to network. Not much to say about here. Average number of bytes received on the machine that Tabmon was running on, in other words, my Tableau server, and the average number of bytes sent. You can see that many more bytes were received. Now, does this have to do with the actual Tableau server? Who knows, right? I might have just copied a big old file during this time period. Or TabJolt might have sent a lot of requests during this period. I really don't know, frankly, but you see a lot more network activity here. And then we see the average bytes being sent probably back to the clients here. Okay. Cache hits and misses. This is kind of an interesting one. There are two counters being measured here. We have in blue, let's see if actually I'll zoom in here. In blue, we have external abstract query hits, but just think of blue as hits. And then orange is misses, okay? Since I focused on this immediately, let's actually talk about what I was focusing on right here. You see this big dip? First of all, don't worry about it. This was right when I killed my VizQL server processes. I mentioned right here that I did that. So what you're seeing here is I'd been essentially gathering values for a certain period of time. And then when I killed those processes, well, the values all reverted to 0 right here. So of course, we're going to see a huge difference. So nothing to worry about there. In any case, you see the number of hits and misses. We spend a lot of time here talking about the cache, or at least this dashboard does. So it probably makes you wonder, ooh, this must be important. You know, I really need to worry about this stuff, and there should be an actual number that I'm trying to hit. Isn't that the case? Well, the answer is no, actually. This is just sort of FYI information. It's great to get query hits. That's query cache hits. That's a great thing. But is it absolutely necessary? No. So don't do anything unnatural to try and pump these numbers up. Really not necessary. If you wanted to, I guess you could do something like take some of your most popular vizzes, put them on a subscription so that every hour or 2 hours they get run, which would populate the external cache that gets shared across all processes. Doing that would also populate the in-process cache for whichever VizQL server process happened to generate the viz when that subscription was fired. But all in all, you're probably spinning your wheels for no good reason. All right, let's move along. Let's take a look at users. So here we're looking at the number of logins, how long it took to log in, and then the active number of VizQL server sessions that get generated. And again, you can see exactly when I was doing my load testing. Lots of logins for a period of time, then nothing. Lots of logins, up to 172 at one point in a 1 minute period. So I was doing a lot of work there. And then again, a period of logging in. My login latency, generally all of these numbers are going to be measured in milliseconds, upwards of 100 milliseconds. So when all was said and done, I was getting in and out of that server from a login perspective pretty quickly. That's good stuff. Active sessions. This one is very interesting to me. And you'll see that I had 63 active sessions, and then 50 sessions, and then 23 sessions, or did I? I find this particular viz in my dashboard a little bit confusing. So let's actually take a look at this a little bit more closely. Again, you see this drop. Here's me recycling, right? This is me killing the VizQL servers, which whack all of my sessions, therefore that big drop. But if you're paying attention, you'll see that this guy has a table calc on it. And I find this a little bit confusing myself. So let's make a copy of this. We'll call it, why don't we call it something really original, like Russell's active requests. And then let's remove the table calc. And we see something that looks dramatically different. And this is actually what's going on in the real world. So it's interesting to talk about this. You can see that when I was doing my first round of load testing, we opened up as many as 600 sessions against the Tableau server. And then nothing went on. And then we opened up yet more sessions in the second round of testing. And then it just sort of sat there, and then it dropped, right? This was me recycling those VizQL server processes. And then I did another test, and it went up, and then it stood there for a little while, and then dramatically, over time, the sessions actually timed out, were bled off, and killed by Tableau server. So this tells us a couple of different things. Just because I have an open session, it doesn't mean I'm actually doing work in that session. Okay, so don't get freaked out when you see tons and tons of sessions being open. The reason why these aren't going away until they eventually bleed off slowly is because they're not going to get killed until either the user logs off and you have a setting that then immediately kills the session when someone logs off, or if they time out. These are sessions timing out. You know, I personally never log out of my Tableau server. I'm lazy like that. You may be as well. And TabJolt doesn't log the servers out. So these are just sessions open but doing no work until they eventually time out and get killed. Again, not active work. That's the key thing, and we'll get into that a little bit deeper later. All right, so let's move along. Requests. Really, we're going to focus on logins because there's not that much else happening here. While I was doing my testing, I didn't publish any workbooks. I didn't go into VizPortal and manually refresh an extract. I didn't do any of this stuff. I didn't execute schedules. So really the only thing that we're going to see here is people logging in, and these are the logins that are being driven by the load testing that I was doing. Thread count. Number of threads on the operating system being created. You can see again when I killed my VizQL processes, that dropped significantly. You can see that overall, one of my Apache processes used a lot of threads. We can do things like return tile images to the browser. There's an actual cache that can speed things up. So this may have been that Apache doing that work. Or this may have just been the gateway that was simply forwarding incoming requests to the VizQL server processes. Latency. This is kind of an interesting one as well. We're measuring two things here: average request latency in milliseconds and average query latency in milliseconds. Let's talk about this one first. This average query latency has absolutely nothing to do with you connecting to your data sources and firing queries. This is all about us connecting to ourself, essentially. Tableau Server connecting to the Postgres database, trying to get information out of that database. How long did that request take? Okay. The top one, average request latency. This is a measure of any activity that was going on based on what we happen to be looking at. So this one could be potentially a little bit more specific based on what you care about. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go to this sheet, and you'll see that we have a category filter here. Let's edit this. And you can see that the things that we're monitoring are events called getView. As an FYI, getView is not executing a view. It's not going out and rendering it. It's getting metadata about the view. So for example, if I'm in VizPortal and I hover over one of the thumbnails of a viz, and then I get a little metadata back, like the author was Russell Christopher, and this was published 3 days ago, blah, 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 blah. That's getView. Guest login, we're also looking at. Let's see what else is here. Publishing workbook. Now, this is very interesting to me. When we publish a workbook to the VizPortal, part of the request latency that is measured is the upload time for an extract that might be part of that workbook. So the fact that I'm mixing something that is potentially a pretty high latency measurement with something that hopefully is very low latency, I want to get that metadata and show it to you in the tooltip really, really fast. You know, the out-of-the-box behavior of this to me is maybe a tiny bit questionable. I would probably come in once I get the generic report and make a copy of this and maybe bucket things a little bit differently, have some high latency events and low latency. So long story short, if you see big spikes here at the top, probably you're dealing with a don't worry about it situation, because you may just have a user who's come along and published a 3 gig extract to your server, which is certainly going to pump the average request latency for that minute-long period that I'm sampling way up. Is that a disaster? No, of course not. It's working exactly the way it should, actually. Okay, we have one more here. Disks. I love disks, and we can see things like % disk read time, write time. This is always a very important one, the disk queue length. If you're not familiar with this, you generally never want to see disk queuing a number more than 2 per spindle. So you can see while I was doing my load testing, a couple of times I got above 2, but only for a second, right? And then it went right back down. There's 3. Over here we have 19. So overall, I'm pretty happy with this because my average disk queue length was 0, meaning that my disk kept up quite nicely. Another one, average disk read in terms of bytes and write in terms of bytes, just in case you're curious about what was happening. Remember these 2 spikes, right? Right at 406 and 505, 506, I bet you these are my backgrounder tasks that were refreshing extracts. So this is where it's good to know and good to have fast disks. One last thing here, let's kind of zoom out and scroll back down. This is a fun one, and this is something that I added in. This is actually, why don't we call it a little bit of preview of what we're going to do in the next set of videos in the next blog entry. Here, I'm looking at a Windows performance monitor called average disk per second transfer time. This is a great counter to track latency on your disk. And depending on who you talk to, the perfect number, the perfect range where you want to be is a little bit different, but most people will agree that it should generally be below 20 to 30 milliseconds. So if my system is working, and this is not necessarily a Tableau number, by the way, this is any low latency application, like a relational database, for example. We want to see generally this number below 20 to 30 milliseconds. So as you can see, as I was working, it always was below 20 milliseconds. Here's that spike. I was spiking a little bit during the extract refresh. This is probably the same thing, another extract refresh. These, I don't know what were going on. This might be, for example, VizQL working my disk really hard after I kill them and 2 new copies come up and they're preparing themselves, but that's just purely guesswork on my part. The key thing here is this is a great disk counter to watch, and that you want to be less than 20 to 30 milliseconds. That's something that sort of simplifies all of this other stuff that we're looking at. In fact, I almost get to the point where all the rest of this is kind of who cares to me. It's this that I look at first. This guy is not part of the default set of information that Tabmon records for you. You can add it in yourself, and I'll show you how to do that later. So we're done with this. I'm going to go back and do one more thing with this that I think you may find interesting. You know, the report that you, the workbook that you downloaded from GitHub and that you're kind of looking at here is great, but you can make it even more useful. For example, let's say that I want to actually filter this information by specific instances. For example, I want to see this by only VizQLs. I have 2 VizQL server processes. I could choose to only look at it by one or by the other. I'll go ahead and add that. Okay, and now I might bring instance and actually add that to rows as well. Oop, looks like I did the wrong thing there. Let's try that again. Let's do instance, put that there. There we go. That's better. And we can see essentially the number of sessions that were being opened on each of my 2 VizQLs. So don't be afraid to go off-road with this, right? That's what Tableau is all about. You should take this base workbook, play with it, make it your own, modify it so it really speaks to you and what you care about. So an example of this that might be an interesting extension is I know I not only want to see the number of active sessions, keeping in mind that active doesn't necessarily really mean work is going on. It just means that they're open and alive. I might want to extend that so I can actually see the number of users who are doing work. So out of the total number of active sessions that I have, how many are actually doing real work? So we can see here that during the peak of some of my testing, probably had about 1,000 active sessions open on this one first copy of my VizQL server. However, when all is said and done, I only had, 6, maybe 7 users actually doing something right when that measurement was taken. That is something that's really useful in terms of keeping an eye on concurrency, etc. This is kind of a little hint of what is yet to come in the next blog posting that I will get to over the next couple of days. Hope this was useful. We're getting near the holidays, so if I don't talk to you again between now and then, have a good stress-free holiday.